Hey, Judge, how are you?
Okay, putting on the earphones. Well, I'm very good. I think, even though there's a lot of chaos going on in the world at the moment, and we seem to be just wandering around, spinning around, uh, a lot of interesting things are happening, and we're seeing a lot of developments. And what I wanted to do today was to talk about the Constitution, because everybody mentions the Constitution, and focus on First Amendment because everybody's arguing about what does it really mean, what are the limits, et cetera, et cetera. But the point I want to get to is artificial intelligence. What's going on and what effect does artificial intelligence have on free speech? And where do we see us going with the Supreme Court and other issues? So I've invited uh, a very, very competent, experienced constitutional lawyer, Corey Silverstein, and he is just going to tell us about historical events and take us through to artificial intelligence. So, welcome. Good to see you again, Corey.
Pleasure's all, brother. It's a pleasure to be here again. We had a blast last time, and your viewers were fantastic. So I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to be here with you again.
Well, I think it's really a very interesting subject. You don't have to be a great intellect because it's pretty much focused on a limited number of issues. So first, tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, thanks. My name is Corey Silverstein. I am the founding member of Silverstein Legal. We are a private boutique law firm based here in Metro Detroit, Michigan. I am actually licensed, though, in Michigan, Arizona, DC, New York, Georgia, and I have a of counsel relationship with my colleague Larry Walters in Florida. So we have a very good presence all across the country, and my office focuses on freedom of speech issues with a very large emphasis on adult entertainment, on the adult entertainment industry, and the various businesses and sectors that intertwine with that sector of the world, so to speak.
Well, I think we should start off by asking you what exactly is the First Amendment?
Sure. Well, the First Amendment, asking me, I'm a little jaded, of course, is going to be, in my opinion, the most important part of the U.S. Constitution. I believe that the First Amendment has and is been let's call it the bedrock of the Constitution. And in essence, in very short order, what the First Amendment does is it protects the freedom of speech, religion, and the press. Also protects the right to assemble peacefully and petition the government. The First Amendment stops the government from engaging in activities that would violate First Amendment rights. Oftentimes, people come to me and they get confused because they think that, well, do I have a First Amendment right with Visa or MasterCard? Well, the answer to that question is no. Those are publicly traded companies. They're not the U.S. government. But ultimately, we're the U.S. government to the U.S. government, which could be a state, it could be a city, it could be a municipality, it could be anything. If they were to create a law that would interfere with an individual's religion, ability, and expression of free speech, this is when a private citizen would have a cause of action against whatever government official it may be that's heading up that particular piece of legislation.
Well, when people talk about free speech, they oftentimes quote an old case back in the 1920s, which talks about fire in a crowded theater. You're familiar with that case, right?
That was the screaming and everybody went running out and trampling over each other.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a good description of it, but free speech was a big issue in that case, wasn't it?
It was. That you're. I'm gonna have to actually this was. I think it was actually. I think it was 1919, and that was when a gentleman who was shouting fire in a movie theater, and as I recall, you're gonna have to give me a minute because I'm going back to my con law and First Amendment classes here. But there was a man who falsely shouted fire in a theater, and that particular case in that situation has now been relied on in hundreds of constitutional cases, and it's kind of created the discourse regarding what the scope of an individual rights are. But thank you for my old First Amendment professor, who I believe is passed now, would be very proud of the fact that I remembered something from his class.
Well, we've come a long way since the fire in the crowded theater. And in fact, that's oftentimes cited as the law, and it's not. But why don't you just take us through the process chronologically and see where we've gone, where we're going, and where we expect to be going?
Well, I mean, the first thing that you have to take into account is you have to take into account that we are right now, as we're doing this broadcast, we're in 2025. The makeup of the United States Supreme Court is what you have to look at right now. And right now in 2025, we have a very conservative, very right-wing Supreme Court that's been very largely influenced as of late by Republican policy, Republican politics, Republican views. Decisions related to the First Amendment, thankfully, over the years have actually, I believe justices have actually gone beyond the walls of politics because they viewed the First Amendment as being such an important issue that they haven't necessarily stuck to call it their political allegiances. Now, that doesn't say that all that goes for all of them. There have been plenty of Supreme Court justices that have stayed very steadfast in terms of their siding with whatever political party they're associated with. But ultimately, what we're facing right now we're facing a very conservative Supreme Court because it's made up of, frankly, the majority is made up of conservative justices. And so a lot of the First Amendment challenges that we've seen as of late have gone in some very unique directions. As of late, we had the TikTok decision is one that comes to mind most notably because we saw the Supreme Court do something very unusual where they decided that instead of applying strict scrutiny or the rational basis test, they decided to apply intermediate scrutiny, which is very, very rarely utilized. And kind of out of nowhere, we saw this idea that the Supreme Court came up with that they were going to do something a little different. So, it becomes very difficult, especially nowadays, to predict what direction this court is going to go in. It's actually almost impossible. Right now, I'm actually involved in one of the Supreme Court cases that's pending that is related to Texas's age verification law. I'm representing the Woodhull Freedom Foundation and the EFF, and we filed amicus briefs in support of the Free Speech Coalition's position that Texas's law is in fact unconstitutional. We just had oral argument on that, probably about a month ago now. I believe it was the 15th or 16th of last month. And we're waiting for the Supreme Court to release their decision, which unfortunately won't be until June. But it was a very interesting argument because what the Supreme Court justices did, Judge, and I think you'll find very interesting, is that the oral argument went for almost 2 hours.
That's a long time.
That is a very long time in terms of Supreme Court. In fact, the recent overturning of Roe versus Wade didn't even go nearly as close to that. So when it comes to the First Amendment decision and the position that the Supreme Court, these justices were ready to rock. Justice Thomas, for example, who very, very rarely, up until recently, very rarely spoke. He broke the ice, so to speak, and he was ready to go with questions. And that kind of followed suit with the rest of the justices during the oral argument because it was very clear that given that this was a First Amendment issue, they had done their homework, they had done their preparation. These guys were ready to ask tough questions to both the Free Speech Coalition's lawyers and the attorneys representing the state of Texas.
Well, you use the term conservative. People hear that term all the time. I'm not so sure everybody understands what it really means. Can you tell us the definition of conservative?
That's a good question. I think the definition of conservatism has changed over the years, because right now, conservatives are very, shall we say, extreme right wing. But ultimately, people who have been identified as being conservative typically have views that are very, let's call them pro-church, very driven by oftentimes Bible gospel, oftentimes driven by very, let's call them people with mentalities of I like to say a little bit older medieval thinking. From the
Your
conservative
IQ is lower than the weather.
I'm trying to, Judge, I'm trying to be very politically correct on your show, and I don't want to use bad words, and I don't want to use words that are going to offend anyone, because look, I've always believed that everybody, and that's actually again one of the beauties of the First Amendment, is that everybody in this country has a right to believe in who they want to believe in, support their candidates and their causes openly without being fearful of persecution or punishment, and that's a bedrock of the United States, of what the country stands for. But conservatives have, in the last couple of years, have become more, I would almost call them more extreme conservatives, and in some cases even certain groups will try to take advantage of it and call themselves conservatives when frankly they're really just hate groups or angry militia or whatever. That's not real conservatism in my opinion. In my opinion, conservatives are really individuals are made up of call it older, more religious driven. I guess you could say more Bible driven methodologies. That would be kind of more of what I would describe. Whereas liberals, on the other hand, have become far less dependent on what people from 100 years ago might have thought or done or did. Their thinking is far more independent, far more open-minded, especially in the terms of such major issues as women's reproduction rights, sexuality. Obviously, I mean, God, we can't even turn on a news network or a TV station right now without there being some debate between a couple talking heads about, what can a woman do with her body? What can someone who no longer wants to identify as a man do? What can someone who no longer wants to identify as a woman do? What if someone wants to identify as both? And we've seen already that Donald Trump took office not even a month ago. It's only been a number of weeks, and he's already been doing quite a bit via executive order to fulfill some of the promises he made to his very conservative voter base.
Well, let me ask you this. Another term that's used a lot is executive order.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the news. It's just described as another executive order.
Yep.
What is an executive order?
So an executive order is a power that the president does have. It's power that's given to him under the Constitution. It's power that allows him to take certain actions via the executive branch. Now, the problem with that is that, as we've seen, and this isn't just a Donald Trump issue, this is a historical issue, is that every president, whether you're Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, whatever, they come into office and they immediately, they use these executive orders, which in many instances actually are worthless. So to give you an example, we saw one executive order by President Trump that was going to eliminate birthright citizenship. Well, that was just stupid, because the only way you can eliminate birthright citizenship would have been via an amendment to the Constitution. But instead, via executive order, which is basically a piece of paper, him saying, "I'm hereby ordering," that went to court, and the courts tossed that out in about 5 seconds. So it's not as though executive orders have no, checks and balances. There are abilities to try to, stop someone from doing things that he simply can't do, which we've seen. And but again, I don't want it to seem like I'm going on a Donald Trump hammering thing here. That's not what I'm saying, because historically speaking, we've seen every president do it. We've seen every president do things both when they come into office and when they leave office that are oftentimes very questionable. Again, to put it in contrast, we had Joe Biden leaving office, who decided to use his pardon power, and he pardoned his entire family, which was a very interesting tactic, and something that he had promised he wasn't going to do but did anyway. So when it comes to executive orders, yes, the president has certain powers. There are certain things that he can do via executive power, but there are limitations, and we've seen repeatedly a president who tries to go too far with executive power gets slapped back into place, as we saw with the recent birthright attempt, or excuse me, the attempt to remove birthright citizenship. Which
I'm about to ask you a very tough question, and that is, what's the difference between the Democratic and Republican parties on the subject of free speech? And that's a very broad question, and I expect a very broad general answer, because obviously there's going to be degrees of everything. But just in general terms, how do you discern the differences?
With Republicans, you typically see a much more conservative approach to free speech. You see them. Let's talk about adult content, for example. Republicans, conservatives, they don't believe, even though we already have, the court has already spoken on the issue of the legalities of pornography and adult entertainment. We still have the far right conservatives that are unsatisfied with the Supreme Court's decision, and so they believe that they should be able to control what speech goes out there, most notably adult entertainment. Far right conservative Republicans are not fans of adult entertainment. They're not fans of pornography, and they will actually take the position that, or they try to take the position that adult entertainment and pornography is not entitled to First Amendment protections, which is absolutely fundamentally dead wrong. But that's their view on it. Whereas on the flip side of that, Democrats are a little bit more, call it open-minded, new age, staying up with the times. Liberals typically are wanting to move with the people's wants, desires, and needs, whereas the conservative Republicans will try to push what they view as the right their version of what the right views were from back when. And I'm always careful, because with saying in the Stone Ages, because I make that reference a lot, and it's some people are offended by that, but it's just more of a conservatives tend to have a much more restricted view of the First Amendment, i.e., they believe that speech can be more restricted than not.
And this is really a very strong political division between both parties. How do you see this getting resolved, if at all?
It can't. I mean, it's funny you should say that. The real problem is the politics, and the justices that are presently on the Supreme Court. I'm going to tell you right now, they're brilliant. Every single one of them are brilliant. There's no such. These are not. If you go back and you look at their legal careers and you look at what they've accomplished, these are brilliant individuals. Brilliant, regardless of what side of the aisle they come from. What I'm hoping to see more of is I'm hoping to see more justices be willing to cross the aisle, so to speak. You hear about the voting party line things all the time. You hear about the Supreme Court going party lines. I believe that if justices continue to be a little bit more, call it courageous, and were willing to, cross over even in opinions when it might not be something that historically people in their political views agreed with, I think that would be good. And I'll tell you, I've actually been surprised, because Judge Barrett, for example, she when Trump selected her and put her on, I was very concerned, because I quite frankly didn't think that she would ever vie away from her very right-wing conservative views. But actually, as we've seen, she actually, in many cases so far, she has kind of shifted a little bit, and she has, not gone with what would historically be, party lines. And we've seen that with a couple of the justices too. And so we need more of that. We need more of the Supreme Court justices thinking in terms of not parties, but thinking about the Constitution, most notably the First Amendment, and what they're supposed to be doing, not what they feel they have to do because of the party that they might be associated with.
Well, isn't this really the equivalent of censorship? It comes
Well,
right down to it.
Well, absolutely, and that's the problem. And the problem right now is what we're seeing, especially at the state law level, is we are seeing a grotesque number of state age verification laws for websites. And the states are arguing all day long that this is all about protecting children. That's their cry for support. But that is it's just a load of crap. What those state age verification laws are about, it's about speech suppression. It's about controlling what speech is going to be accessible and what speech is not going to be accessible. And this is why virtually every single one of these laws have constitutional challenges against them now, and why they're going to be tied up in the courts for a number of years. But the nature of passing laws specifically to interfere with a person's ability to engage in free speech, to view what they want to view, see what they want to see, it's disgusting. Look, I see characters on TV spewing all sorts of hate, just absolutely hatred, horrible things. There's celebrities that say things that are just absolutely outrageous. I get stunned that they still get movie roles and people buy their albums and stuff. But guess what? The fact is that they can say that stuff because frankly, in the United States, the First Amendment gives them that right. And I believe that, look, yes, sometimes we don't like what people have to say, but that's part of the equation, and that's what makes the First Amendment so great.
But censorship is a subject that's been going on for a long, long time. Now, we know that for the next 4 years, President Trump is likely to be able to name an additional justice or more, actually. There's always been talk, I should say always, there's been some recent talk about Justices Alito and Justice Thomas retiring. What do you think, based on what you've seen so far, is the kind of justice he will select?
Well, it's interesting because I actually wrote about this, and I very respectfully disagree. I actually do not believe we're going to see a change. Trump is he's limited to one more term in office, which gives him basically the next 4 years. And if you look at the Supreme Court, in actuality, the Supreme Court's current makeup is actually relatively young compared to some previous Supreme Courts that we've had. I actually don't believe any of the justices that are on the Supreme Court right now have any intention of stepping aside or retiring so that Donald Trump can appoint someone else. I mean, look, were Donald Trump going to, if he were given another selection, the answer to the question is very simple. He'll do what we've already seen him do. He'll go with someone that's more conservative. We'll see someone who has taken very right-wing conservative views. That's exactly what will happen. But again, I actually don't believe we're going to see a change in the next 4 years. I believe that for the next 4 years, we're going to have what we're going to have. There's, absent there being some sort of, unexpected death or illness or something, or actually illness wouldn't really do it. But if there's some sort of unexpected death or something that led to someone, unexpectedly stepping down, I'm not seeing any retirement or anything like that. And these justices are not going to be, one thing about them is they are not going to be pressured by politics. No one's going to pressure any member of the Supreme Court right now. No one's going to pressure them to retire early so that Donald Trump can get another or extra pick before he leaves office. I don't see that happening.
Well, let's take it now to the present. AI. We did a show on AI just recently, And everybody understands that AI represents the term artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
What effect, if any, has AI had on First Amendment rights?
Well, AI is turning into first of all, I have to say I love AI. I love the technology. I love I love the potential that it has. The fact that we're even having a conversation about this, and we're getting to live through this AI kind of generation, if you want to call it that, is incredible. Sky's the limit in terms of what can come out with it. But now, in terms of the mess that they're leaving, but AI leaves behind, is a whole other issue. Because the fact is that we really don't have laws yet on the books to address AI. So what's happening now is everyone's kind of going with the flow. They're either trying to use laws that are already on the books that simply weren't written with AI ever being contemplated, and so people are really, they're scrambling, and there's a lot of cases pending in the courts, but it's going to take years for us to have decisions. So, but when it comes to AI, what I've been telling people, and I've been preaching this as loud as I can at the top of my lungs to everyone: if you're going to get into AI, whether you're going to be launching an AI product, whether you are going to be using an AI product, you have got to read the legal agreements with what you're signing up for. If you're using a software, you need to understand what rights you're giving up. Who owns the work product? Who owns the intellectual property? Who is it that gets to revoke those rights? Good song.
Got it.
All of these things are. Let me take that a step back. All of these things are issues that now everybody has to use. So, when the everyday computer user goes online and takes their picture and uploads it to some AI site that then takes that picture and does all sorts of things with it, every single time that website has terms of use or a checkbox that the user has to agree to that binds themselves to whatever contract is there, these terms are going to be held enforceable. And so what people need to understand is you can't just click a button, put your picture out there, and just hope to God that it's only being used for what you thought it was going to be used. That line of thinking is broken, and you're going to get yourself into all sorts of trouble.
Well, doesn't one of the problems relate to the identification of people who create and ultimately disseminate this material?
Absolutely. There's, when we first started seeing the AI evolution, one of the first things that happened was we started seeing deep fakes. Deep fakes was a technology whereby you could basically take a person's head and then put them into any position that they wanted. We saw celebrities like Jennifer Aniston, who was put into very precarious positions where it was, her head in some sort of, pose that she never agreed to, and so forth. So a lot of states actually started combating deep fakes by using some of the laws they had on the books, and frankly, they used criminal laws to go after that sort of activity. But there's an element, unfortunately, there's always going to be bad people out there, and bad people are always looking to profit and to gain off of good things. AI is great, but like everything else in this world, you can take something and use it for the absolute worst possible. So while AI has, tons of advantages, of course, we're seeing a segment of the population that's trying to use it for bad, which is where they're just trying to monetize people's name and likeness without their consent, or with their consent, and they don't even realize it.
It kind of borders on rights of privacy cases too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and we're going to have to wait a little bit to see where it all evolves. But between now and for people that are listening to this, this podcast now, and if they're listening to this 6 months from now, 12 months from now, it's going to be a totally different world. There's going to be other laws that are going to be out there. There's going to be more regulation. It's an evolving sector, and we have to see where it's going. Consumers right now are getting very upset, and you say, well, why are consumers getting upset? Because consumers are oftentimes driven to online products and services via what they perceive to be a person. They think that they're talking to someone. I'll give you the perfect example. Your airline nowadays, you call your airline and you want to, get some sort of customer support service, and they say to you, well, we have a 45-minute hold time, but if you hit this button, you can talk to, our automated thing, whatever. And now you're in the whole world of, you are having a conversation with an automated system, not someone that can think on its own, but in essence, a series of computer programs. There is consumers that are now getting upset because consumers are often complaining that they didn't realize they were talking to an AI bot. And so the FTC, for example, has taken note of this. And the FTC is now taking the position that if you are if you have a product and you're using an AI service without telling the consumer that, hey, you're talking to an AI bot or you're talking to an AI algorithm, you may be engaging in fraudulent, deceptive trade practices. I actually believe that we're going to see in the next 12 to 24 months a huge increase in FTC enforcement actions against companies using AI technologies that are failing to properly disclose it.
Now, we hear a lot about TikTok.
Yeah.
What is going on in terms of government regulation? I know there have been cases. In fact, the Supreme Court decided a case basically requiring it to be disbanded.
Right.
Where are we going with that?
Well, the TikTok thing is interesting because the TikTok situation, I believe, is actually more political than anything else. At the crux of the political argument is that there are certain people in the United States government that are concerned that they don't know what data TikTok is taking from its users and giving it back to China. And the argument is that, individual privacy rights are being violated and nobody has a clue what's going on. And so the only way to do this was to shut it down. But now, of course, what we've seen is we've seen a massive change in government. And, Donald Trump, who, as everyone knows, is very, very business friendly and very business and let's make a deal oriented, instead of trying to push forward the turning off of TikTok in the United States, he's postponing it and, looking outside the box, trying to bring in American investors and trying to make deals and et cetera. So the TikTok issue, I believe, is highly, highly, highly political. Yes, it's true that if you are utilizing an internet product that you can download and share all sorts of data, yes, it is true that platform can take all sorts of data, but you have to think about the danger of the argument that just because they're a Chinese company, we have to be worried about it. Okay, if that's the case, well, if more than 50, let's just say more than 60% of the cellular phones that are used in the United States are manufactured in a plant in China, does that mean that now that the executive government should ban, the ability to use cell phones that are manufactured in China? Where does it end? And this is the danger in this line of thinking. So, look, I certainly do believe that there should be some transparency from TikTok in terms of what they're doing, and I can understand where some people have reservations, but the line of thinking that, okay, it's a Chinese product and therefore, we don't really know what's going on with data, therefore we're just going to, ban it. I find the argument kind of flawed because, again, you look at, I don't know if anyone, listening has ever ordered an iPhone, but when you get your iPhone tracking, you see that the iPhone is being sent to you directly from a plant in China. So are we saying that every single iPhone can't be trusted? Is that? I think that the TikTok argument has gone a little bit far. Now, from a cultural standpoint, I will tell you, I think TikTok is stupid, but that's just more of my personal view than anything. I find the idea of just sitting there watching people doing, skateboarding and putting their pet chicken on a on a tire is just, it doesn't really suit my needs. But at the end of the day, I am very pro information technology, and I believe that the internet is the biggest development to the free sharing of information we have ever had in history. In the history of man, we have never had a technology like the internet that allows people to communicate like that. Many people, many scholars, and I've had this debate with many people, I wonder whether if the internet had existed, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, some of the world conflicts that we had, would those world conflicts even have taken place if information could have been shared quicker? Or with the public, deeper conversation for another day.
Well, we are heading to that point. Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? Because I keep thinking about the book 1984 and the lack of privacy that we do have. And you look at some of the stories that are included in the book, and it certainly looks like it's a reflection of what's going on today. And then we watched 2001: A Space Odyssey not too long ago, just because the subject matter seemed interesting. And you keep thinking, you've opened the pod door, Hal. When is the computer age or the AI age going to take over and make decisions for us and do some analytical thinking at the same time? So where do you think we're going with all of this?
We are, contrary to the movies, I do not believe that AI is going to lead to computers taking over and being the end of the world. I don't believe that. I believe actually we are, or I like to believe that we're actually smart enough to not, do something stupid like that. But look, anything's possible. But I'm actually an optimist because I believe with AI, the possibilities in terms of so many different categories are endless. I mean, I believe that we're going to see a massive growth in healthcare availability, especially even to places that may not have had accessibility to certain health specialists. I think AI is going to change all that. I think AI is going to dramatically change how a person spends their day in the workforce. I think that we're going to see AI be a huge driver in terms of man's, next big mission, which is trying to get someone to Mars. I'm very optimistic on it. I am not pessimistic. Look, do I have concerns about data privacy? Yes, but AI hasn't changed my concerns about it. I mean, look, at this point, I think I probably get at least one letter a month from some store or some product that I bought letting me know that there's been a data breach and all my information has been shared with some nefarious source. At this point, I just go under the assumption that my that my private information has somehow been nefariously utilized. So to me, I'm optimistic. I believe that, the future is incredibly bright with AI. I think there's going to be things that are going to change. I think, if you already look at Hollywood and you look at the movie industry and you look at, what can be done with it. I mean, hell, if I was an actor nowadays, I'd be very, very concerned about my future. So, I think we have some substantial change coming up, but I'm not going to say that I'm pessimistic about it because I don't think being pessimistic about human evolution via technology is fair. I don't think we should ever get to a point as humans that we just stop, that we stop technological development, that we stop thinking, we stop trying to create more. That if that were the case, then we'd all still be running around with wheels made out of rock and kind of looking more like characters from the Flintstones.
I was just thinking about that, actually, the Flintstones. Well, sounds like you're optimistic and realistic at the same time. So that would probably be a good time for us to stop talking for today. And we'll have you back as things evolve. And I want to thank you again, Corey, for being available and discussing this very, very fascinating subject. So thanks again.
It's my pleasure, and thank you, Judge, for continuing to do what you do. This exchange of information is so key, and love what you're doing. So keep it up.
Thanks.